first order of business, uncharted territory, not just for Greece, but for the globe. Will the trouble afflicting the Eurozone remain a regional problem, more political than economic, or could it, like Lehman Brothers, reveal global weakness thanks to our connectivity? Capital is global in nature. That means many a national political tussle is too. Welcome to The Exchange. Greece truly did enter uncharted waters today after a majority of voters there voted against further spending cuts and other austerity measures in what has been an historic referendum. There weren't close results either. 61% voted against a package of spending cuts demanded by international creditors. For people in Greece, the uncertainty continues. Banks are closed for a second week, cash reserves are running low, and there are reports that without further funding, they could soon run out of cash altogether. The European Central Bank is in talks, trying to decide whether to throw those banks yet another lifeline. Europe is scrambling to figure out its next steps, too. Government sources say Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras told German Chancellor Angela Merkel today that Greece plans to present new proposals aimed at restarting stalled debt talks at a meeting of EU finance leaders in Brussels tomorrow. In a move that surprised many today, the outspoken Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis resigned in the wake of the referendum results. In a statement, Varoufakis said, "I was made aware of a certain preference by some Eurogroup participants and assorted partners for my absence from its meetings," an idea that the Prime Minister judged to be potentially helpful in him reaching an agreement. Varoufakis will be replaced by Oxford-educated economist Euclid Sakalotos, who's played a backroom role during this crisis. The news didn't change the EU's pessimistic tone today. Here's what the Vice President of the European Commission had to say.
The no result, unfortunately, widens the gap between Greece and other Eurozone countries.
Alex Jurshevski is a managing partner with Recovery Partners. And Alex, this obviously has been a slow-moving tragedy, but is this tragic now? Is this now past a turning point, or is this just another kind of gambit in the negotiating that'll go on?
Completely avoidable. This was foreseen 5 years ago that we'd get to some point like this. Unfortunately, the tables are turned now, and it's the Europeans that are really the ones that are staring into the abyss, because what's not generally recognized is that the rescue mechanism that was put in place 5 years ago to provide the bailout funding to Greece is actually a roach motel that has captured all the EU countries in its grip. And if somebody makes a wrong move here, and it's a credit guarantee structure, which means that if countries get downgraded, they fall out of the guarantee structure, and more of the financial obligation falls on the stronger credits, meaning Germany, at this point, Germany and France. It could ensue that Germany ends up holding the bag for as much as 50% of the entire Eurozone bailout, 50% of its own GDP, over €1 trillion.
Now, the debt itself, though, technically, I'll just walk us through this, is actually held by the European Central Bank. In other words, if there's a debt restructuring going on, is it not the European Central Bank that has to agree to those terms?
No. What they had 5 years ago was a situation where Greece owed money to a vast collection of institutions and banks in Europe.
Yeah.
At that point, they owed about €230 billion. With the restructuring, what they did was they apportioned the debt restructuring away from the private sector lenders and largely towards the EC, the ECB, the European Central Bank,
yeah,
and this bailout mechanism. The bailout mechanism, the ESM or the ESFF, whatever you want to call it, currently holds about 140 billion of this garbage.
And does it have the power to, as a private sector lender could, say, okay, I'll take 50 cents on the dollar, I'll extend a maturity, I'll do all kinds of things in order to avoid a worse outcome?
No. The problem is that this is a credit guarantee structure without a guarantee in place.
Right.
So if they take a haircut, you have a guarantee with no backing. It means that the countries that have contributed to that facility immediately have to go out and provide a guarantee. What this is likely to end up as, none of that's probably going to happen. They're probably going to end up with another fudge. They'll issue a bunch more paper, and they'll call it even and try and go home. But at the end of the day, what this is risked now is all of the EU countries that are part of the credit guarantee mechanism falling deeper and deeper into debt. It's a reverse option.
So what is the best way forward It's for Greece. Obviously, there's a couple of bad outcomes here. Possibly, do you believe that they will leave the euro, return to the drachma, and face the dire consequences that would attach to that?
That would have been the correct thing to do 5 years ago. What we were recommending was a soft exit for Greece. They reissue the drachma. They negotiate terms where they can re-enter in 5 to 8 years. Now it becomes far more problematic because you've got this roach motel that's trapping everybody, and it's hard to see what type of outcome this is going to have. You know, these are all bad choices, and so the outcomes from a financial standpoint are bad for everyone here, not only the Greeks. The Europeans are staring into an abyss right now.
So one of the questions that we, for the last several years, have been preoccupied with, and then from time to time become less concerned about it, is the contagion effect. To what extent is the rest of the world, global capital markets, hedge funds in New York, whatever it means, what we learned in 2007-8 is we're connected in ways we don't anticipate. Is that a problem here in the same kind of way?
It most certainly is, because everybody owes, you know, we're living in a capitalist system. Everybody's got assets and liabilities. Everybody's connected to everybody else. I mean, at the end of the day, the Chinese government is one of the largest owners of sovereign bonds not its own sovereign bonds in the world. They own Japanese debt, they own European debt, Federal Reserve owns a lot of European bonds. Bank of Canada, you know, everybody is connected to this thing. And if it goes down badly, everybody's going to lose money.
So make a prediction that what happens over the next days and weeks. Do we expect to see, for instance, banks in Italy or Portugal or Spain suddenly seeing a run on capital as people fear some kind of knock-on?
Extremely likely. Extremely likely. And what needed to have happened ahead of this in Greece is that they should have printed up, you know, a whole bunch of banknotes to be able to feed the ATMs. I mean, one of the problems they have is they can't feed the ATMs. You end up with social disorder. People can't feed themselves. It's only a short step from that to storming the ramparts, you know. And in Europe, you've got layered on top of this a population that's had to suffer through a 6-year grind of a recession with 30 and 40% unemployment in some cases. And most of these unemployed are, generally speaking, younger people with time on their hands. Those are the people that are going to raise hell. You know, if there's going to be a riot, they're the ones that are going to be in a riot. You're not going to get grannies in wheelchairs throwing rocks.
Who can we most trust to work this out? Is it the IMF? Is it the Troika? Who's in charge?
No, nominally the IMF is in charge, but let's not forget that the IMF was created to deal with balance of payments crises under a fixed exchange rate system. In 1971, when the U.S. went off the gold standard, the fixed exchange rates went into the tank. That system was abandoned. The IMF has been an institution. It's been a hammer looking for a nail. And they've made a hash of every restructuring they've been involved with. And I can say from firsthand experience that these guys are ivory tower people, and they've made a hash of this Greek restructuring. In 2011, after this whole deal was put together, I went to Washington. I talked to the people. And I asked them, how can you ply a country with so much extra debt and expect something good to come out of this? Because your own guidelines mandate that, you know, debt to GDP numbers over 70, 80% are extremely dangerous. You've just given these guys 175% debt to GDP. How can you expect something? They had no answer. This is a problem of their own making. And so the issue, though, then becomes, well, who else is there? Well, the folks in the EU aren't that much better because they signed off on this. Who at the banks? The banks were the guys that they basically tried to get themselves out of the line of fire and put the official institutions in that line of fire because they didn't want to take losses. They're trying to avoid losses. So they used their leverage, their political leverage, to get this deal for themselves.
You say 5 years ago there should have been a soft exit. Why not a soft exit now? Why not give the Greek people a floating currency to at least have that exchange mechanism that acts as a bit of a lever to kickstart?
This is all possible, but you have to get past the fact that we're not in this world where Greece owes money to a lot of people. We're in this world where Greece owes money to 3 lenders, and where those guarantees will zap those lenders where it hurts most. What would the bond market look like if all of a sudden Germany got hit with these additional guarantee requirements and had to issue 40 or 50 billion euros of bonds? The European bond market is extremely vulnerable right now, as are global bond markets, and that's really where you're going to see the contagion come through. It's going to come through these traded markets. And to the extent that they dislocate, they could cause huge problems for global finance. Everybody's floating on these low rates right now. Business valuations, stock markets, everything's geared to a low rate world. Tim Hortons has several billion of bonds several hundred million of bonds outstanding. It's a coffee shop, for God's sake. As long as those bond yields are 2-3%, they're okay. But the profitability of scores of corporations could evaporate if they had to pay real rates, if rates went up to a level where it started hurting.
Thanks, Alex. Alex Jurshevski is managing partner at Recovery Partners. Coming up after the break, can the Chinese government wield enough control to stop a stock market plunge in its tracks? We've got the roundup after this.